First of all, thank you everybody for having me. I'm really excited to be part of this conference. And I saw on the program that you've had a number of people talking about the harms of tech systems and how they've been used in Palestine in particular. So I don't want to be redundant. So maybe I will just kind of briefly touch on that and discuss some of the ways in which people have been resisting. So Silicon Valley, where I've been around for a while, we are told that tech is a magical force that's going to save the world. So if you see Sam Altman's tweets, he's always saying things like, quote, "I think AI is going to be the greatest force for economic empowerment and a lot of people getting rich we have ever seen." And one of the biggest VCs, venture capitalists, Mark Andreessen, wrote a techno manifesto, which I had the misfortune of reading, called "Why AI Will Save the World." And he said, "I even think AI is going to improve warfare when it has to happen, by reducing wartime death rates dramatically. Every war is characterized by terrible decisions made under intense pressure and with sharply limited information by very limited human leaders. Now, military commanders and political leaders will have AI advisors that will help them to make much better strategic and tactical decisions, minimizing risk, error, and unnecessary bloodshed." We know that this is the opposite of what is happening right now, right? So we, I believe, November or December, wrote an open letter to be signed by people in what is called the Responsible AI community. So the title of the letter was "The Responsible AI Community in Solidarity with Gaza and the Palestinian People." And in this letter, we were discussing the ways in which tech was used to commit this genocide, apartheid, and occupation. And there was an article responding to this letter. And in this article, a computer science professor was quoted. So Yoav Goldberg, a professor at Bar Ilan University and research director at AI2 Israel, emphasized that many of the AI systems or surveillance systems described in the letter have likely saved countless Palestinian lives. This is the complete opposite of what is happening, right? In your earlier sessions, there was Anthony Lowenstein, the author of the Palestine Laboratory, who talked about how Palestine is Israel's workshop, where an occupied nation on its doorstep provides millions of subjugated people as a laboratory for the most precise and successful methods of domination. Israel's NSO Group, developer of the Pegasus software found on phones of human rights activists worldwide, is the world's most successful cyber surveillance company and is the tip of the iceberg of this surging industry, which largely operates in the shadows with no public scrutiny. Israeli warfare and surveillance technology is a multi-billion-dollar industry led by companies like weapons and drones manufacturer Elbit Systems and NSO Group. And I know that in your prior sessions, you also had Matt Mahmoudi talking about facial recognition technology and how it restricts freedom of movement across checkpoints. And of course, there are also tools like Smart Shooter that automate killing by adding AI to automatic weapons at those checkpoints. We've also, contrary to the statement that AI is being used to minimize civilian casualties, we've also seen some horrific weapons, like they had these names Lavender and things, and the Gospel, that were actually exponentially maximizing civilian death tolls. One of the most dehumanizing things I heard was that Israeli soldiers are rewarded for the number of Palestinians they add to face recognition databases, with people getting days off or bonuses if they are in the unit that adds the most number of Palestinian faces. There are also drone snipers firing at targets around Gaza hospitals. One of the, again, most dystopian things that I saw or heard was these quadcopters that play sounds of women and children crying, so that if you go to help them, then they shoot at you. So, these weapons are used to persecute people and kill people, and then people escape war and persecution that is enabled with these weapons, only to be met with the same weapons at borders when they're trying to flee, right? So borders are the biggest worldwide apartheid systems that have been normalized. If you want to read more about this, there's this great book called Resisting Borders and Technologies of Violence. So I want to talk a little bit about the places that I'm from, that I know, and how they're connected to what is happening in Palestine. So I was born and raised in Ethiopia, and I'm of Eritrean descent. In 2017, Eritrea came just after Syria for the number of refugee applicants in Europe. So keep in mind that Syria's population is probably 5 times more that of Eritrea. We don't know for sure because no one has done a census in Eritrea. Eritrea boasts the longest detained journalists in the world, has over 360 detention facilities. Many people are actually imprisoned in shipping containers. And so the temperature can be so hot that your skin gets attached to the container and stuck to the container. It's the only country in the world that has never had elections, has never instituted a constitution, has zero free press, parliament, no independent arm of government, except for the dictator Isaias Afwerki, who has ruled with impunity for 30 years, over 30 years. So we have one of the highest immigration rates in the world. And so these refugees encounter, like I said, the world's largest apartheid system, which we have normalized, the borders, the visas required to enter them. And how do we normalize these worldwide apartheid system? How do we enforce it? So here's an article, a report called Inside New Refugee Camp Like a Prison. Greece and other countries prioritize surveillance over human rights. In this report, they talk about all sorts of things like magnetic gates with kilometers, NATO's type security fences, smart software using motion detection algorithms, automated decision-making, biometrics, and unpiloted drones are increasingly controlling migration as states turn to unregulated technological intervention fueled by lucrative and privatized border industrial complex. Who is at the helm of this border industrial complex? Well, the same systems, the same organizations that are profiting off of Palestinian death and genocide, like Elbit Systems. So Elbit Systems of America, a subsidiary of the Israeli arms company, has built many what are called integrated fixed towers throughout southern Arizona. So in the US-Mexico border, same thing, right? The border industrial complex, a global apartheid system trying to reduce the number of refugees coming in. And so these systems that they have daytime, nighttime vision, thermal energy cameras that can see at a distance of up to 7.5 miles, as well as ground sweeping radar with a radius of nearly 13 miles. So the harms that are outlined above, the border industrial complex, etc., they have an extraordinary growth in the budgets for immigration and border policing, which have increased from 1.2 billion in 1990s to 25.2 billion in 2019. And this is a political choice, right? This is not an inevitable state of affairs. The US spends orders of magnitudes more on border policing tech and weapons than, for instance, reducing climate change, which is an actual existential risk to humanity. And again, this growth is a political choice rather than an inevitable state of affairs. So this is Eritrea, right? One of the places that I'm from. I want to tell you about another place. So I was born and raised in Ethiopia, and there is a region of state in Ethiopia in the northern state of Tigray. Tigray has been undergoing a genocide since 2020. So there was a war that was declared on November 4, 2020. And I want to ask, I want you to reflect if you have ever heard about this war on the news. So the genocide in Tigray is the deadliest war of the 21st century, killing an estimated 800,000 people, which I believe is actually an underestimate. I believe at least double that amount of people have died, with over 100,000 women being victims of rape as a weapon of war. And now there is a famine induced by the genocide. So we talked about social media in the past session and how it is used to silence Palestinian voices as well as spread genocidal language. And I want to give you a brief excerpt of a social media post that I was really worried about. It was like a call to commit genocide. It says, "The war is with the person who grew up with you, your neighbor, but is favoring his own race and waiting for your death with hatred of your people. If you can clear and control these thorns and insects in the forest, victory is yours, and you need to do it now. Only if you're fast, you can save your people from embarrassment. Speed up and do it now." So they were telling people to commit genocide now. Go to your neighbor and kill them now, even if you feel bad. This post, Facebook responded saying that it didn't violate its terms, and it removed the post 18 hours later after reporters called to ask why it didn't violate their terms of service. So just like what's happening in Palestine, they let genocidal language go rampant and victims are silent. And this bias is even built into machine translation technology, right? In 2017, a Palestinian man wrote "Good morning," which was translated to "attack them." And he was arrested, but later released earlier. I don't want to know what would have happened to this person if it was now. And I want to let you know that Israeli drones were also among the weapons used to commit the genocide at Tigray. So, Anthony Lowenstein says the Abraham records were an arms deal, right? Every despot in the world is clamoring to get Israeli weapons to use against their own people to build electronic border walls, or to get against their own people, or to build electronic border walls. So it is a little case of, the saying, none of us is free until all of us is free. So what are you doing? What should we do? What are people doing? The thing that has really been moving the needle is collective action, right? The first thing students are doing is stop universities from being military contractors. These are supposed to be a place of education. There was an article called an opinion editorial by MIT saying that MIT and other universities have to explicitly acknowledge their histories with contributions to human suffering and international conflicts. I don't know if you know that MIT was responsible for the founding of Raytheon, which is either the first or second weapons manufacturer's company. Stop universities from being hedge funds. If you go to tahrirumich.org//why-divest, so it's the Tahrir Coalition, they did this study that showed that out of University of Michigan's $23 billion endowment, 62% was in high-risk investments connected to weapons manufacturers and the Israeli state. And these people are working on open source tools to enable others to do the same analysis. And these students all over the world, let me say particularly in the US, have been suspended. They've lost jobs. They've been stopped from graduating. They've been beaten by police. They've been sprayed with the skunk water that is used against Palestinian neighborhoods. The whole weight of the state and billionaires, like the billionaires who are trying to bribe Mayor Eric Adams of NYC to call the police on Columbia students, is coming down on these students. So the whole weight of the system is coming down on these students. The second thing we need to do is stop big tech companies from being complicit in genocide, apartheid, and occupation. So, Polaroid workers did this in the US, and they started the first divestment movement against apartheid South Africa. And now Google and Amazon workers are revolting against Project Nimbus, and Google just fired 50 plus workers for protesting. Google and Amazon are in the business of making Israeli apartheid more efficient, violent, and deadly, right? They are providing the government with $1.2 billion worth of cloud compute infrastructure. And we should say we will not take money from war profiteers. Supporting the students and the people who are getting fired is really important, because we need to build power and change the tide, right? So supporting these people locally, I think, is really important. While we should avoid tech solutionism, I think we can still use our skills to put data in the hands of marginalized communities. So, for example, the organization Forensic Architecture used synthetic images generated from 3D software to train machine learning classifiers that classified images with tear gas grenades. So this allowed them to identify the use of what were called triple chaser tear gas grenades against civilians. And they created an open source tool to help other human rights-based organizations to do similar types of investigations. So we can use our skills to do these kinds of things. There is no place too insignificant not to care about, right? I don't know how many of you heard of the country Eritrea before I mentioned it today. So there is no group of people that is too unimportant to care about, and it really is true. The existence of what is experimented in Palestine is exported worldwide. I gave you two examples of Eritrea or Tigray. And when we're silent about any of these places, whether it's Sudan or the Democratic Republic of Congo or Palestine or Tigray, it means that there is an existence of such a place. We're letting them have a proof of concept, basically, right? That it's possible to do this kind of thing in the world. And we need a world where doing this is impossible. That's the world we need to create. And so, as Ruha Benjamin says, as we're dismantling, so she says, remember to imagine and craft the worlds you cannot live out, as well as just as you dismantle the ones you cannot live within, right? Remember to imagine and craft the worlds you cannot live without, just as you dismantle the ones you cannot live within. So no one owns tech. We're technologists. Tech is not synonymous with building weapons and killing people. And we need to remember that we can have a future where the types of horrifying tech we're seeing in Palestine doesn't exist anywhere in the world. We can have a world where this doesn't exist anywhere. And so it's not inevitable to have this tech right now. And it is not inevitable for us to see and ignore horrific genocides. We can have a world where this is not possible. So I want to kind of take you back to using our imagination, right? That things are not inevitable. And remember Ruha's quote again, remember to imagine and craft the worlds you cannot live without, just as you dismantle the worlds that you cannot live within. And with that, I will end my remarks. And again, thank you for having me at this conference.